Good evening. I hope you've had a great day today. Welcome to BVJ's Bedtime Stories. I'm Big Voice Jay, and this is the show where we get you ready for a good night's sleep with public domain short stories for all to enjoy. You can follow along as we read at twitch.tv/BigVoiceJ. Tonight's story is The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. Most terribly cold it was. It snowed and was really quite dark. And evening, the last evening of the year. In this cold and darkness, there went along the street a poor little girl, bareheaded and with naked feet. When she left home, she had slippers on, it is true, but what was the good of that? They were very large slippers, which her mother had hitherto worn. So large were they, and the poor little thing lost them as she scuffled away across the street because of two carriages that rolled by dreadfully fast. One slipper was nowhere to be found. The other had been laid hold of by an urchin, and off he ran with it. He thought it would do capitally for a cradle when he some day or other should have children himself. So the little maiden walked on with her tiny naked feet that were quite red and blue from cold. She carried a quantity of matches in an old apron, and she held a bundle of them in her hand. Nobody had bought anything of her the whole livelong day. No one given her a single farthing. She crept along trembling with cold and hunger, a very picture of sorrow, the poor little thing. The flakes of snow covered her long fair hair, which fell in beautiful curls around her neck. But of that, of course, she never once now thought. From all the windows the candles were gleaming, and it smelt so deliciously of roast goose. For you know it was New Year's Eve. Yes, of that she thought. In a corner formed by two houses, of which one advanced more than the other, she seated herself down and cowered together. Her little feet had drawn close up to her, but she drew colder and colder, and to go home she did not venture, for she had not sold any matches and could not bring a farthing of money from her father. She would certainly get blows. And of course it was cold too at home. For above her she had only the roof, which through the wind whistled, even though the largest cracks were stopped up with straw and rags. Her little hands were almost numbed with cold. Oh, a match might afford her a world of comfort, if she only dared take a single one out of the bundle, draw it against the wall, and warm her fingers. She drew one out. Shh! How it blazed! How it burnt! It was a warm, bright flame, like a candle. As she held her hands over it, it was a wonderful. It seemed really, to the little maiden, as though she were sitting before a large iron stove with burnished brass feet and a brass ornament top. The fire burned with such blessed influence, it warmed so delightfully. The little girl had already stretched out her feet to warm them too, but the small flame went out. The stove vanished. She had only the remains of the burnt-out match in her hand. She rubbed another against the wall. It burned brightly, and where the light fell on the wall, there the wall became transparent like a veil, so that she could see into the room. On the table was spread a snow-white tablecloth. Upon it was a splendid porcelain service, and the roast goose was steaming famously with his stuffing of apple and dried plums. And what was still more capital to behold was, the goose hopped down from the dish, reeled about on the floor with knife and fork in its breast, till it came up to the poor little girl, when the match went out, and nothing but a thick, cold, damp wall was left behind. She lighted another match. Now there she was, sitting under the most magnificent Christmas tree. It was still larger and more decorated than the one which she had seen through the glass door in the rich merchant's house. Thousands of lights were burning on the green branches and gaily colored pictures, such as she had seen in the shop windows. They all looked down upon her. The little maiden stretched out her hands towards them when the match went out. The lights of the Christmas tree rose higher and higher. She saw them now as stars in heaven. One fell down and formed a long trail of fire. "Someone is just dead," said the little girl. For her old grandmother, the only person who had loved her, and who was now no more, had told her that when a star falls, a soul ascends to God. She drew another match against the wall. It was again light, and in the luster there stood the old grandmother, so bright, radiant, so mild, and with such an expression of love. "Grandmother," cried the little one, "oh, take me with you. You go away when the match burns out. You vanish like the warm stove, like the delicious roast goose, and like the magnificent Christmas tree." And she rubbed the whole bundle of matches quickly against the wall, for she wanted to be quite sure of keeping her grandmother near her. And the matches gave such a brilliant light that it was brighter than at noonday. Never formerly had the grandmother been so beautiful and so tall. She took the little maiden on her arm, and both flew in brightness and in joy so very high. And then above was neither cold, nor hunger, nor anxiety. They were with God. But in the corner, at the cold hour of dawn, sat the poor girl, with rosy cheeks and with a smiling mouth, leaning against the wall, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. Stiff and stark sat the child there with her matches, of which one bundle had been burnt. She wanted to warm herself, people said. No one had the slightest suspicion of what beautiful thing she had seen. No one ever dreamed of the splendor in which, with her grandmother, she had entered on the joys of a new year. Well, isn't that a real corker of a story? Why on earth would you choose that one, Big Voice Jay? Well, I say it to say this. I think we can all agree 2020 has been quite the year. But at least you're not dead. You're on the right side of the planet. And every day that you rise, you got some fight left in you. There's still some weeks left in this old year, and we don't know what's around the bend. No one does. So keep that fight in you. Keep that fire burning. And maybe get some shoes from Zappos.com. And go to BVJ in the promo code, and it'll do absolutely nothing, because this is not a sponsored read. You can, however, make sure that you never miss an episode of Bedtime Stories by giving us a follow at our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/BigVoiceJ. Our next story is from William Dean Howells, called Turkeys Turning the Tables. Well, you see, the papa began on Christmas morning, when the little girl had snuggled into his lap into just the right shape for listening. It was the night after Thanksgiving, and you know how everybody feels the night after Thanksgiving. Yes, but you needn't begin that way, Papa, said the little girl. I'm not going to have any moral to it this time. No, indeed, but it can be a true story, can't it? I don't know, said the little girl. I like made-up ones. Well, this is going to be a true one anyway, and it's no use talking. All the relations in the neighborhood had come to dinner and then gone back to their own house. But some of the relations had come from a distance, and these had to stay all night at the grandfather's. But whether they went or whether they stayed, they all told the grandmother that they did believe it was the best Thanksgiving dinner they'd ever eaten in their born days. They had had cranberry sauce, and they'd had mashed potato, and they'd had mince pie and pandowdy, and they'd had celery, and they'd had Hubbard squash, and they'd had tea and coffee both, and they'd had apple dumpling with hard sauce, and they'd had hot biscuit and sweet pickle, and mangoes and frosted cake, and nuts and cauliflower. Don't mix them all up so, pleaded the little girl. It's perfectly confusing. I can't hardly tell what they had now. Well, they mixed them up in just the same way, and I suppose that's one of the reasons why it happened. Whenever a child wanted to go back from dumpling and frosted cake to mashed potato and Hubbard squash, they were old-fashioned kind of people, and they had everything on the table at once, because the grandmother and the aunties cooked it, and they couldn't keep jumping up all the time to change the plates. And its mother said it shouldn't. Its grandmother said, indeed it should, then, and helped it herself. And the child's father would say, well, he guessed he would go back too for a change, and the child's mother would say, she should think she would be ashamed. And then they would get to going back, till everything was perfectly higgledy-piggledy. Oh, shouldn't you like to have been there, Papa? Sighed the little girl. You mustn't interrupt. Where was I? Higgledy-piggledy. Oh, yes. Well, but the greatest thing of all was the turkey that they had. It was a gobbler, I tell you. That was nearly as big as a giraffe. Papa. It took the premium at the county fair. And when it was dressed, it weighed 15 pounds. Well, maybe 20. And it was so heavy that the grandmothers and the aunties couldn't put it on the table. And they had to get one of the papas to do it. You ought to have heard the hurrahing when the children saw him coming in from the kitchen with it. It seemed as if they couldn't hardly talk of anything but that turkey the whole dinner time. The grandfather hated to carve, and so one of the papas did it. And whenever he gave anybody a piece, the grandfather would tell some new story about the turkey, till pretty soon the aunties got to saying, now, Father, stop. And one of them said it made it seem as if the gobbler was walking about on the table to hear so much about him, and it took her appetite all away. And that made the papas begin to ask the grandfather more and more about the turkey. Yes, said the little girl thoughtfully. I know what papas are. Yes, they're pretty much all alike. And the mamas began to say they acted like a lot of silly boys, And what would the children think? But nothing could stop it. And all through the afternoon and evening, whenever the papas saw any of the aunties or mamas round, they would begin to ask the grandfather more particulars about the turkey. The grandfather was pretty forgetful, and he told the same things right over. Well, and so it went on till it came bedtime, and then the mamas and aunties began to laugh and whisper together, and to say they did believe they should dream about that turkey. And when the papas kissed the grandmother good night, they said, well, they must have his mate for Christmas. And then they put their arms around the mamas and went out haw-hawing. I don't think they behaved very dignified, said the little girl. Well, you see, they were just fun and they just got going. It was Thanksgiving anyway. Well, in about half an hour, everybody was fast asleep and dreaming. Is it going to be a dream? Asked the little girl with some reluctance. Didn't I say it was going to be a true story? Yes. How can it be a dream then? You said everybody was fast asleep and dreaming. Well, but I hadn't got through. Everybody except one little girl. Now, Papa, what? Don't you go and say her name was the same as mine and her eyes the same color. What an idea! This was a very good little girl, very respectful to her papa, and didn't suspect him of tricks, but just believed everything he said. And she was a very pretty little girl and had red eyes and blue cheeks and straight hair and a curly nose. Now, Papa, if you get to cutting up, well, I won't then. Well, she was rather a delicate little girl, and whenever she overate or anything, have bad dreams. Aha! I told you it was going to be a dream. Now, you wait till I get through. She was apt to lie awake thinking, and some of her thinks were pretty dismal. Well, that night, instead of thinking and tossing and turning and counting 1,000, it seemed to this other little girl that she began to see things as soon as she got warm in bed, and before even. And the first thing she saw was a large, bronze-colored turkey gobbler? No, ma'am. Turkey gobbler's ghost. Phoo, said the little girl rather uneasily. Who ever heard of a turkey's ghost, I should like to know? Never mind that, said the papa. If it hadn't been a ghost, could the moonlight have shone through it? No, indeed. The stuffing wouldn't have let it. So you see, it must have been a ghost. It had a red pasteboard placard round its neck with First Premium printed on it, and so she knew that it was the ghost of the very turkey they had had for dinner. It was perfectly awful when it put up its tail and dropped its wings and strutted just the way the grandfather said it used to do. It seemed to be in a wide pasture like that back of the house, and the children had to cross it to get home, and they were all afraid of the turkey that kept gobbling at them and threatening them because they had eaten him up. At last, one of the boys, it was the other little girl's brother, said he would run across and get his papa to come out and help. And the first thing she knew, the turkey was after him, gaining, and all the grass was then full of hen turkeys and turkey chicks running after him, and gaining, and just as he was getting to the wall, he tripped and fell over a turkey pen, and all at once she was in one of the auntie's room, and the auntie was in bed, and the turkeys were walking up and down over her and stretching out their wings and blaming her. 2 of them carried a platter of chicken pie, and there was a large pumpkin jack-o'-lantern hanging to the bedpost to light the room, and it looked just like the other little girl's brother in the face, only perfectly ridiculous. Then the old gobbler, first premium, clapped his wings and said, "Come on, children." And then they all seemed to be in her room, and she was standing in the middle of it in her nightgown and tied round and round with ribbons so she couldn't move hand or foot. The old gobbler, first premium, said they were going to turn the tables now, and you knew what that meant. For they had that in the reader at school just before vacation, and the teacher had explained it. He made a long speech with his hat on and kept pointing at her with one of his wings, while he told the other turkeys that it was her grandfather who had done it, and now it was their turn. He said that human beings had been eating turkeys ever since the discovery of America, and it was time for the turkeys to begin paying them back, if they were ever going to. He said she was pretty young, but she was as big as he was, and he had no doubt they would enjoy her. The other little girl tried to tell him that she was not to blame, and that she only took a very, very little piece. "But it was right off the breast," said the gobbler, and he shed tears, so that the other little girl cried too. She didn't have much hopes, for they were all seemed so spiteful, especially the little turkey chicks. But she told them that she was very tender-hearted and never hurt a single thing, and she tried to make them understand that there was a great difference between eating people and just eating turkeys. "What difference, I should like to know?" said the old head turkey, pretty snappishly. "People have got souls, and turkeys haven't," says the other little girl. "Well, I don't see how that makes it any better," says the old hen turkey. "It don't make it any better for the turkeys. If we haven't got any souls, we can't live after we've been eaten up, and you can." The other little girl was awfully frightened to have the hen turkey take that tack. I should think she would have been," said the little girl, and she cuddled snugglier into her papa's arms. What could she say? Oh, go on. Well, she didn't know what to say, that's a fact. You see, she never thought of it in that light before. All she could say was, well, people have got reason anyway, and turkeys only have instinct. So there. "You'd better look out," says the old hen turkey. And all the little turkey chicks got so mad they just hopped. And the oldest little he turkey that was just beginning to be a gobbler, he dropped his wings and spread his tail just like his father, and walked around the other little girl till it was perfectly frightful. I should think they would have been ashamed. Well, perhaps old First Premium was a little, because he stopped them. "My dear," says to the old hen turkey and chickedren, "you forget yourselves. You should have a little consideration. Perhaps you wouldn't behave much better yourselves if you were just going to be eaten." And they all began to scream and to cry, "We've been eaten, and we're nothing but turkey ghosts." "There now, Papa," says the little girl, sitting up straight so as to argue better. "I knew it wasn't true all along. How could turkeys have ghosts if they don't have souls, I should like to know?" "Oh, easily," said the Papa. "Tell how," said the little girl. "Now look here," said the Papa. "Are you telling the story, or am I?" "You are," said the little girl. and she cuddled down again. Go on. Well, then don't you interrupt. Where was I? Oh, yes. Well, they couldn't do anything with them, old First Premium couldn't. They acted perfectly ridiculous, and one little brat of a spiteful little chick piped out, I speak for a drumstick, Ma. And then they all began, I want a wing, Ma. I'm going to have the wishbone, and I shall have just as much stuffing as ever I please, shan't I, Ma? Till the other little girl was perfectly disgusted with them. She thought they oughtn't to say it before her anyway, but she had hardly thought this before they all screamed out. They used to say it before us, and then she didn't know what to say, because she knew how people talked before animals. I don't believe I ever did, said the little girl. Go on. Well, old First Premium tried to quiet them again, and when he couldn't, he apologized to the other little girl so nicely that she began to like it. He said they didn't mean any harm by it. They were just excited, and Chickydren would be Chickydren. Yes, said the other little girl, but I think you might take some older person to begin with. It's a perfect shame to begin with a little girl. Begin, says old First Premium. Do you think we're just beginning? Why, when do you think it is? The night after Thanksgiving. What year? 1886. They all gave a perfect screech. Why, it's Christmas Eve, 1900. And every one of your friends has been eaten up long ago, says old First Premium, and he began to cry over her, and the old hen turkey and the little turkey chicks began to wipe their eyes on the backs of their wings. I don't think they were very neat, said the little girl. Well, they were kind-hearted anyway, and they felt sorry for the other little girl. And she began to think she had made some little impression on them when she noticed the old hen turkey beginning to untie her bonnet strings, and the turkey chicks began to spread round her in a circle, and the points of their wings touching, so that she couldn't get out. And they commenced dancing and singing, and after a while that little he-turkey says, Who's it? And the other little girl, who didn't know why, says, I'm it. And old First Premium says, Do you promise? And the other little girl says, Yes, I promise. And she knew she was promising, if they would let her go, that people should never eat turkeys anymore. And the moon began to shine brighter and brighter through the turkeys, and pretty soon it was the sun, and then it was not the turkeys, but the window curtains. It was one of those old farmhouses where they don't have blinds. And the other little girl woke up, shouted the little girl. There now, Papa. What did I tell you? I knew it was a dream all along. No, she didn't, said the Papa. And it wasn't a dream. What was it then? It was a trance. The little girl turned round and knelt in her papa's lap, so as to take him by the shoulders and to give him a good shaking that made him promise to be good very quick. And very well then, says the little girl. It wasn't a dream. You've got to prove it. But how can I prove it, says the Papa. By going on with the story, says the little girl. And she cuddled down again. Well, that's easy enough. As soon as it was light in the room, the other little girl could see that the place was full of people, crammed and jammed, and they were all awfully excited and kept yelling, Down with the traitress! Away with the renegade! Shame on the little sneak, till it was worse than the turkeys 10 times. She knew that they meant her. She tried to explain that she just had to promise, and that if they had been in her place, they would have promised too. And of course, they could do as they pleased about keeping her word, but she was going to keep it anyway, and never eat another piece of turkey, either at Thanksgiving or at Christmas. Very well, then, says an old lady who looked like a grandmother, and then began to have a crown on and to turn into Queen Victoria. What can we have? Well, says the other little girl, you can have oyster soup. What else? And you can have cranberry sauce. What else? You can have mashed potatoes and Hubbard squash and celery and turnip and cauliflower. What else? You can have mince pie and pandowdy and plum pudding. And not a thing on the list, says the Queen, that doesn't go with turkey. Now you see. The Papa stopped. Go on, said the little girl. There isn't any more. The little girl turned around, got up on her knees, took him by the shoulders, and shook him fearfully. Now then, she said, while the Papa let his head wag after the shaking, like a Chinese mandarin's, and it was a good thing he did not let his tongue stick out. Now will you go on? What did the people eat in place of turkey? I don't know. You don't know, you awful Papa? Well, what did the little girl eat? She? The Papa freed himself and made his preparation to escape. Why, she ate goose. Goose is tenderer than turkey anyway, and more digestible. And there isn't much of it, and you can't overeat yourself and have bread. Dreams? Cried the little girl. Trances, said the Papa. And she began to chase him all around the room. Brought to you by turducken. Or chicken, stuffed inside a duck, stuffed inside a turkey. That'll learn 'em. It won't come around here anymore. Enter code BVJ in the Google search and it'll do absolutely nothing because this is not a sponsored read. Those are our stories tonight. Thank you very much for listening. If you have a story you'd like me to read, please email me, bigboysj@gmail.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe on all your favorite players of pods. And you can subscribe directly at the website, bedtimewithbvj.com. Thanks so much for listening. Good night.